My name's Wreck-It Ralph. 30 years I've been doing this. It starts to feel hard to love your job when no one else seems to like you for doing it. Sure must be nice being the good guy. I don't want to be the bad guy anymore.
Wreck-It Ralph is an animated feature that takes place inside the hidden world of arcade video games, a universe that exists just beyond the glass screens players interact with every day. The story imagines that when the arcade closes and the lights go out, the characters inside each cabinet live full, structured lives with rules, routines, and social hierarchies shaped by their programming. At its core, the film explores identity, purpose, and the emotional cost of being defined by a single role, especially when that role is viewed negatively by everyone else. The setting allows the film to blend nostalgia for classic arcade culture with a modern emotional narrative that speaks to anyone who has ever wanted to be seen as more than what they are expected to be. The central figure is Ralph, the so-called bad guy of an old-school arcade game, where his only function is to wreck a building, while another character repairs the damage and receives praise. For decades within the game's timeline, Ralph has played his role faithfully, but he is exhausted by the lack of appreciation and the social isolation that comes with being labeled a villain. His frustration is not rooted in a desire to cause harm, but in a deep longing for acceptance and dignity. This emotional foundation gives the film its heart, turning what could have been a simple comedy into a character-driven story about self-worth. Ralph's world is governed by strict rules that all game characters are expected to follow. One of the most important is that characters must stay within their assigned games because leaving can cause their home game to malfunction. Despite this, Ralph decides to leave his game in search of a medal, believing that possessing a tangible symbol of heroism will finally earn him respect. This decision sets the plot in motion and introduces the audience to a broader arcade ecosystem, where different games are connected by power cables, allowing characters to travel between worlds. As Ralph ventures beyond his own game, the film introduces a variety of distinct environments, each inspired by different genres of video games. These worlds are visually and tonally unique, ranging from gritty, action-oriented settings to bright, candy-colored landscapes. This variety allows the story to move fluidly between comedy, action, and emotional drama, while constantly reinforcing the idea that every game, no matter how different, has its own internal logic and community. One of the most important relationships in the film develops between Ralph and Vanellope von Schweetz, a small, energetic character from a racing game set in a world made entirely of sweets. Vanellope is treated as an outsider in her own game due to a glitch that causes her to behave unpredictably. Much like Ralph, she is excluded, mocked, and denied the opportunity to fulfill her intended role. Their connection is immediate and meaningful because both characters recognize the pain of being rejected for something they cannot control. Vanellope's dream is to race, which is the central mechanic of her game, but the other characters actively prevent her from participating. Ralph initially sees her as an obstacle to his own goal, but over time he begins to understand her struggle and empathize with her desire to prove herself. Their relationship becomes the emotional backbone of the story, illustrating how shared vulnerability can create genuine bonds even in the most unlikely circumstances. The film also introduces a group of villains from various games who attend a support group to cope with the stigma attached to their roles. This clever narrative device reinforces the theme that being labeled a villain does not inherently make someone evil. These characters provide humor, but they also serve as a reminder that identity is often imposed rather than chosen. Through them, the film challenges the simplistic idea of good and bad, suggesting instead that behavior and intention matter more than assigned roles. As Ralph's journey continues, he enters a high-intensity military-style shooter game, where he encounters a tough and disciplined character named Sergeant Calhoun. This world is defined by constant danger and strict order, contrasting sharply with the playful chaos of the candy-themed racing game. Calhoun's story adds another layer to the film's emotional depth, revealing that even the strongest and most composed characters carry unresolved trauma tied to their programming. The plot gradually escalates as Ralph's actions begin to have unintended consequences. In his attempt to help himself, and later to help Vanellope, he disrupts the natural balance of multiple games. The stakes rise when it becomes clear that certain threats, if left unchecked, could spread across the entire arcade and put every game at risk. This shift transforms the story from a personal journey into a broader conflict with real consequences. Throughout the narrative, the film carefully balances humor with emotional sincerity. Visual gags and playful references to gaming culture are used not just for nostalgia, but to build a believable world with its own history and logic. The comedy often arises from character interactions rather than slapstick, allowing the emotional moments to land with greater impact. This balance is one of the film's strongest qualities, ensuring that it appeals to both younger audiences and adults. The voice cast plays a significant role in bringing these characters to life. The performance behind Ralph captures both his physical strength and his emotional vulnerability, making him feel relatable despite his exaggerated design. Vanellope's voice performance adds layers of charm, mischief, and sincerity, perfectly matching her unpredictable nature. Supporting characters are equally well realized, each contributing distinct energy and personality that enrich the overall narrative. The film's visual design is deliberately varied, with each game world featuring its own color palette, textures, and animation style. This approach reinforces the idea that these games were created by different developers within the fictional universe, each with unique priorities and aesthetics. The candy-themed racing world is bright and whimsical, while the shooter game is darker and more intense, and Ralph's original game reflects the simplicity of early arcade design. Music and sound design are used strategically to enhance both the emotional beats and the action sequences. The score shifts seamlessly between playful melodies and more dramatic compositions, supporting the story without overpowering it. Sound effects are carefully crafted to evoke classic arcade games, grounding the fantastical premise in familiar sensory experiences that resonate with audiences who grew up around gaming culture. As the story reaches its climax, Ralph is forced to confront the consequences of his choices. He realizes that his desire to be seen as a hero led him to overlook the needs and feelings of others, particularly Vanellope. This moment of self-awareness marks a turning point in his character arc, emphasizing that true heroism is defined by sacrifice, empathy, and responsibility rather than external validation. The resolution of the film reinforces its central message that accepting oneself is not about changing who you are, but about understanding your value within your role. Ralph does not stop being a wrecking character, and he does not suddenly become the traditional hero of his game. Instead, he learns to take pride in what he does, and in the positive impact he can have when he acts with intention and care. Vanellope's journey reaches a satisfying conclusion as well, as she is finally able to reclaim her place and embrace her true identity. Her arc highlights the importance of perseverance and self-belief, especially when facing systemic exclusion. Together, Ralph and Vanellope demonstrate that friendship and mutual support can transform personal struggles into shared victories. The film was released in 2012 and quickly stood out for its inventive premise and emotional depth. It arrived at a time when animated features were increasingly focused on complex themes that appealed to a broad audience. Rather than relying solely on spectacle, the film invested heavily in character development and world building, setting it apart from more formulaic entries in the genre. Marketing materials and previews emphasize the novelty of the arcade setting and the presence of familiar game-inspired elements, but the full emotional scope of the story was something audiences discovered through the film itself. The anticipation surrounding its release was driven by curiosity about how such a concept could sustain a feature-length narrative, a challenge the film ultimately met with confidence. In retrospect, Wreck-It Ralph can be seen as both a celebration of video game history and a thoughtful exploration of personal identity. Its ability to weave together humor, nostalgia, and emotional storytelling is a key reason it continues to resonate. The film does not simply reference gaming culture as a backdrop, but uses it as a metaphor for how people are often confined by expectations and labels. By the end, the arcade world feels alive and interconnected, a place where every character, no matter how minor, has a purpose and a story. The film leaves viewers with a sense of optimism, rooted in self-acceptance and empathy. It suggests that even in systems designed to be rigid and repetitive, growth and change are possible when individuals choose to see value in themselves and others. Wreck-It Ralph ultimately succeeds because it understands that the most compelling journeys are internal ones. Beneath the colorful animation and inventive settings lies a story about belonging, friendship, and the courage to define oneself beyond imposed roles. It is this emotional clarity, combined with creative world-building, that secures the film's place as a memorable and meaningful entry in modern animated cinema.